The Styrian Hills would play host to the 11th round of the Formula 1 season, at the track known for punishing cars like FOM punishes small F1 YouTube channels. Hey there guys, I'm Will, welcome to FP1 and the comedy review, which might be a bit harder on me this week. Now, I don't think I've mentioned it much, but I was on a much needed holiday in Tenerife over this last weekend, meaning what little live action I was able to catch wasn't commentated in English, so bear with me if I miss anything this time round. Who am I kidding? You'll bollock me anyway. On the bright side, I was able to pick up a little bit of Spanish in my week away. For instance, esa es mi tumbura, ahora vete a mierda gordo, which means that's my lounger, now f*** off you fat slob. Let's just get into the comedy review of the Austrian Grand Prix.
We are a fucking bunch of wankos.
So it's news time, and the big story of the week was all about flexi floors, as allegations emerged that some teams were deploying this aerodynamic phenomenon to stop their cars shagging the circuits. Unsurprisingly, the two teams at the head of this debate were Mercedes and Red Bull, but that's about as much as I want to cover, given that I stopped giving a damn halfway through the 2021 season. Ferrari's internal struggles also plagued the headlines, after McLaren seemed more excited to see Sainz win in Silverstone than his own team. The Scuderia have made some slight alterations to their livery this weekend, running the old prancing horse logos to remind them of a time where they weren't completely incompetent. And finally, it was the second sprint weekend of the season, because we all love those, don't we? That meant we'd get our standard qualifying on a Friday. But before we have first practice to cover, topped by current championship leader Max Verstappen. The Dutchman has an impressive record at the Spielberg circuit, however was less of a fan of the new mobile chicanes installed for this year's Grand Prix. Could be worse though, as McLaren and Lando Norris would get hardly any running at all, his car getting too hot to handle in the middle sector. Other drivers were pushing the limits of the circuit, Hamilton and Bottas both going off, while Sergio Perez got his practice in for race day. And with that, we're straight into qualifying, and pain for me and all of the Daniel Ricciardo fans as he went out in Q1. Nicholas Latifi also returned after a week away in Silverstone and slotted into his typical P19 slot on the grid, with Zhou and the Aston Martin duo making up the rest of the drop zone. Lando Norris would be the shock loss from Q2, car issues relegating the Brit to 15th on the sprint starting grid, while Sergio Perez looked to be in danger of failing to progress, but put in a totally legal lap to keep both Red Bulls in the top 10. That meant joining Norris in the drop zone would be the two AlphaTauris, Alex Albon and Porridge Man. But who would take pole for the sprint then? Well, it would be Verstappen leading the way in the initial runs with both Ferraris in hot pursuit. However, Mercedes have been the dark horses throughout the day, so could they provide an upset in the final part of qualifying? Okay, spoke too soon there. With Hamilton in the wall and the session stopped, Merck's hopes rested on the shoulders of George Russell, who rested his car against the barriers at the final corner. So it was back to a two-horse race then between Red Bull and Ferrari, and with very little time left in the session, drivers would have only one more lap to dictate their position on the starting grid. Initially, Ferrari looked like they'd done enough, with Leclerc on provisional pole and Verstappen a 10th down in the middle sector. However, the Flying Dutchman pulled out all the stops in the final part of the lap to snatch back P1 ahead of the sprint on Saturday. But we have the morning FP2 session to go over first, where very little usually happens. So in short, Sainz topped the hour, the Alpines also looked good, and Leclerc shit himself. There was perhaps more action going on off the circuit, as track limits had been the talking point of the day, and many drivers were falling foul of them. You seem to have two options in this scenario. You could A, not go over the white lines, or B, drive a Red Bull. The race directors would finally notice the antics of Sergio Perez ahead of the sprint, and remove all of his Q3 lap times as well as his final attempts in Q2, relegating the Mexican to 13th on the starting grid. Would he be able to make that ground back? Well, Fernando Alonso definitely wouldn't, after Alpine opted to place him on the tyre blanket compound ahead of lights out. And though his car was clear by the time the formation lap came to an end, shows Alfa Romeo got some Silverstone PTSD and refused to start the race either. Maybe that was for the best, as when the lights did go out, Verstappen kept the lead while the Ferraris squabbled over second. But at the back, Pierre Gasly took the Zhou line into turn 1 and almost had a carbon copy accident. Minus the flipping and the gravel. Look, it started similar, alright? While he recovered, Sainz tried to take the lead into turn 3, though ran wide, allowing Leclerc back past. Now, while a human being that wasn't completely senile might try and work together to close up to the Red Bull in front, we've got to remember that this is Ferrari, who opted to bicker with each other on track, gifting the sprint win to Verstappen. That sums up the gist of Saturday's race, but there was more action going on further back, especially with Alex Albon, who took an admittedly harsh 5-second penalty for forcing Norris off the track at turn 3, before showing some character development and Hamiltoning Vettel off the road in the closing stages. Lewis himself, meanwhile, was trying to fight through the field after being caught up in the Gasly incident on lap 1, and had now found himself behind the Haas cars, who, despite not fitting any upgrades, were running on the fringes of the points, and quite well for Haas, I'll give him that. Mick Schumacher thought he was quicker, though was refused passage past his teammate, leaving him as the sacrifice from the Mercedes behind. In fairness to Mick, though, he did defend his position valiantly, and it's good to see the German with some more confidence after his first points last time out in Britain. Hamilton would eventually pass Schumacher in the closing stages to take the final point on Saturday, as Max Verstappen claimed victory ahead of Leclerc and Sainz. That leaves us then with just Saturday's main race to cover, and with rain threatening the track in the morning, all was to play for on the final day at Spielberg. The lights would go out and the top two would get away relatively evenly, as Russell made a move on Sainz, which soon turned into a defence from the fast-charging Perez, who had climbed up to 5th by the end of the sprint. Now the Mexican was looking for P4, but George was continuing to copy his teammate Lewis Hamilton, bidding the second Red Bull driver into the gravel and picking up a 5-second penalty. Cut to lap 12, and Verstappen had continued to maintain a slight lead over Leclerc, but not for long, as the Monegasque slotted his Ferrari up the inside into turn 4, catching the Dutchman napping as the lead changed hands. So as we waited for the inevitable Ferrari engine failure, Red Bull opted to pit Verstappen to take the fight to the Scuderia on strategy, as meanwhile further back, Hamilton was still battling to get past the Haas cars, pulling a super move through turn 8 on lap 14 to clear Schumacher before passing Magnussen just half a lap later. K-Mag would soon find himself in a 5-car scrap, giving us perhaps one of the best examples of racing with these new regulation cars, and through some utter miracle, none of them would end up in the barrier. Now just imagine if this guy was still in that seat. Anyway, back at the front, and having done 27 laps on the medium compound, Ferrari finally decided to pit Leclerc onto fresh rubber to chase down Verstappen. And that's exactly what he did, passing car 33. Oh, he's not car 33 anymore. Passing car 1 on lap 33. That just doesn't sound... Anyway, Verstappen then opted to focus on complaining over the radio instead of battling with the Ferrari. The Dutchman hadn't enjoyed life on the hard compound of tyres, so just imagine his elation when Red Bull slapped him with another set when he pitted on lap 37. As he continued to struggle, let's take a quick break from that battle and catch back up with poor Sebastian Vettel, who was taken out by yet another Red Bull reject, bringing an end to a truly horrid weekend. Going back to what matters though, and with the leaders on very different strategies, we got to see Leclerc pit again, chase down Verstappen again, and pass the Dutchman like he was in an F3 car again. And now Red Bull were turning their sights onto Carlos, who was looking to make it a Ferrari 1-2 in the closing stages. Oh, there's that engine failure I mentioned. With the Spaniard's car and his newly found confidence going up in a plume of smoke, no one was left to challenge the top two, as Leclerc came through to take his first win since Australia and reignite his championship challenge. Mercedes, meanwhile, were able to recover to 3rd and 4th, and it was more points for Mick Schumacher, who took his best career result with P6. You can just see my driver predictions video aging worse and worse at this point. But there we have it. It's hard for me to really judge this weekend, having missed so much of the live action, but it seems the general consensus was it was a pretty good race. We're at the halfway point of the year now, and with any luck, Charles can take this momentum forward and bring the title challenge back in the second half of the season. My money's still on Max, but you never know. Let's just wait and see. But if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and get subscribed to the channel if you haven't already. We're still aiming for that 50k subscriber mark, so if you haven't done so yet, I'd really appreciate if you hit that big red button below. If you want to hear more from me, then you can check out my Instagram and Twitter. And finally, a huge thank you to all my patrons for supporting the work I do. If you want to contribute in that regard, the links to all of that are in the description and pinned comment of this video. That's all from me though. I'll see you soon with another video, but until then, have a good one.